Hello, students. I'm going to work on some examples that will hopefully help you along the way as you solve the equations in this assignment. So I'll be doing examples from a Math Excel assignment that I've pulled up. So our problem number 1, I have 6 plus 6q equals 10 plus 5q. So your goal would be to get the variables on the left. So to do that, I'm going to subtract 5q from both sides of the equal sign. And so that'll cancel. On the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, I'll have 6 plus 1q equals 10. And then my next goal would be to get my numbers on one side, so I'll subtract 6. That'll let 6 cancel, leaving me with 1q equals 4. And then I can divide on both sides by 1, and q will equal 4. And that'll be an example of your first problem on this Math Excel assignment. For your second problem, we'll be solving a quadratic x squared minus 36 equals 0. So your problem will be similar to this. And so you'll need to recognize that you have a difference of two perfect squares. And so there are different ways that you could do this, but one way would be to use the formula a squared minus b squared equals a plus b times a minus b. And then setting each one of those parentheses equal to 0. So we would need to know the a for this problem. That's going to be the square root of x squared, which is x. So the a in our problem is an x. And the b in our problem is the square root of 36. And so I can do the square root of 36, and that will be 6. So b is 6. So according to the formula, I would have two parentheses, x plus 6 times x minus 6 equals 0. Then I'll set each one of those parentheses equal to 0 individually and solve. So I can solve on the x plus 6 equals 0 by subtracting 6 from both sides of the equal sign. And I'll have the 6's canceling, giving me x equals negative 6. And then I can move to my second equation. I can add 6 to both sides of the equal sign, making those cancel and giving me x equals positive 6. When you type them into Math Excel, it says to give both your answers with a comma in between. So you would type them in as negative 6, comma, positive 6, or whatever your answers turn out to be. So there's an example like your second problem on this solving equations assignment. The third one that you'll have to do will be a trinomial where you could do the quadratic formula or you could solve it by factoring. So I'm going to work this one by factoring. So this will be problem number 3. So problem number 3 for me is q squared minus 4q minus 5 equals 0. So to factor it, I'll have my a, which is 1, my b, which is negative 4, and my c, which is negative 5. And I'll create a chart looking at what multiplies to AC. AC in my problem is -5, and what will add to B, and B in my problem is -4. So multipliers to 5 would just be 1 and 5. So if I make the 5 negative, 1 times -5 will give me -5, and 1 plus -5 will give me -4. So then I can go back to my problem, having q squared, and then using my numbers that I found, plus 1q minus 5q, and then finishing out with -5 from the problem equals 0. And then I can cut this, look to see that I can divide both of these terms by q, which would give me q, and then the parentheses, q squared divided by q would be a q plus, and then 1q divided by q would be a 1. On the other side, I could, on the other side of the cut line, I could divide by -5. And so I'll have -5 and then start another parentheses with q, and then -5 divided by -5 would be +1. Now remember that this is a matching parentheses of q plus 1, and so that's one of my factors. And then my other factor is the q minus the 5. But this is still not finished because we are being asked to solve the equation. So from there, I'll need to set each one of my parentheses equal to 0. And so I'll do the q plus 1 first. And I can take that and subtract 1 to both sides, giving me q equals -1. That's one of my solutions. And then setting the other parentheses equal to 0, q minus 5 equals 0. I can add 5 to both sides of the equation, giving me q equals 5 as my other solution. And again, it asks you to type them in using a comma. So make sure when you type them into Math Excel, -1, 5, where it asks for it. Okay, so there's an example like your problem number 3. We'll move on and look at what you'll need to do for problem number 4. So for problem number 4, I have x squared minus 8x equals 0. So I do have two terms, but not both of those are perfect squares. So what I can notice is that both of these can be divided by an x. So I'll factor out an x and then start a parentheses, which would be x squared divided by x, giving me x, minus an 8x divided by x, giving me 8, equals 0. Now, I do not have two parentheses, but I do have two factors, so they each have to be equal to 0. So the first one is this x equals 0, and that is actually one of the solutions. And the other factor is the x minus 8 equaling 0, and I can add 8 to both sides of the equal sign, giving me an answer of x equals 8. And so my two solutions would be 0, comma, and then the 8. Okay, there's an example like your problem number 4. problem number 5 does say to use the quadratic formula to solve the problem, and you had another problem similar to this where you could have used the quadratic formula, but we decided not to. On this one, we actually have no choice but to use the quadratic formula because if I were to multiply the A and the C, there would be nothing that could multiply. Actually, I could do this one by factoring, and I think I will. So, excuse me, I'm changing my mind. So this is like your problem number 5. And even though it does say to use the quadratic formula, I'm actually not going to. I'm going to give you a chance to see what this one would look like by factoring. So, like I did with a previous one, I'll have my A, B, and C. So A is the 4, B is the -8, and C is 3. So I could look to see what multiplies to AC. AC, 4 times 3, that's 12. And what will add to give me B, which is -8. Make sure you have negative. Now, yours is going to have different numbers, remember, but same process. So I would have to think of multipliers to 12. I have 1 and 12. I have 2 and 6. And I have 3 and 4. I want something that will multiply to 12 and add to -8. If I make both my 2 and 6 negative, then it will add to -8 and it will multiply to +12. So I'll take 4x squared, and then my middle terms, I'll use -2x minus 6x, and then plus 3 equals 0. I can do my cut line and divide by my common factor, which actually would be 2x. So I'll have 2x and then start a parentheses, making 2x minus 1. For my second part of this, I can divide. Now, since I have a negative on the 6, I'll need to divide by -3. And that will leave me with 2x minus 1, which is a match. So my parentheses are 2x minus 1. And then for my other one, 2x minus 3. So it did work to factor this. Now remember, we're not finished. So we're going to take each parentheses and set it equal to 0. So starting with 2x minus 1. Now you have a little more work to do. We'll need to add 1 to both sides, which would make 2x equals 1, since this part will cancel. Now we'll divide by 2 on both sides, and that is a fraction, and we want to leave it as the fraction 1/2. So there's one of the answers. And then we have 2x minus 3 equals 0. We can add 3 to both sides, giving me 2x equals 3. Since I had the 3's canceling, I can divide both sides by 2, and I'm going to get another fraction. X equals 3 over 2, and I just want to leave it that way. And so my final two answers are x equals 1/2 and x equals 3/2. And you can type those in as fractions with a comma separating them. So it did say to use the quadratic formula, but I did it by factoring instead of by the quadratic formula. So the method that I've shown you here is a method of factoring. Okay, so there's number 5. We'll move on, take a look at number 6. Now, number 6 is the one I was thinking about. We have no choice but to use the quadratic formula for this. So your quadratic formula will be given to you on your work page. It's x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And so in my problem, I have the problem x squared minus 3x minus 5 equals 0. So in my problem, the a is a 1, the b is negative 3, the c is negative 5. So I'll have x equals, all right, so I'm going to use a parentheses anytime I substitute in. So it's the negative of negative 3 plus or minus, then my giant square root. The b is in parentheses, negative 3 squared minus 4 times my a, which is 1, times my c, which is negative 5, and then my denominator, which is 2a, or 2 times the 1. And then we'll use Desmos. So the double negative gives me positive 3 plus or minus inside the square root. Now I can use Desmos to do this calculation. I have negative 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 5. If you type that in, you'll get 29 inside the square root, and then this is over 2. And since the 29 does not simplify, this is actually my final answer, except that I need to separate it. So I'll have it separated as x equals 3 plus the square root of 29 over 2, and x equals 3 minus the square root of 29 over 2. And those would be the two answers that I would type where it asks for the solution. You would type in this one and then a comma and then this answer. All right, for problem number 7, it says that you can solve this equation by factoring. So I'm going to go back to factoring on this one. So my problem, and this again is like your number 7, we have x to the 4th minus 6x to the 2nd minus 27 equals 0. So a is 1, b is negative 6, and C is negative 27. So we can look to see what multiplies to give me my AC. AC is negative 27. And what will add so that I get B, which is negative 6. So I can think about my multipliers to 27. I have 1 and 27. 2 does not work. 3 does. 3 and 9. Now, if I make the 9 a negative, then 3 times negative 9 will be negative 27. And 3 plus negative 9 will add to give me negative 6. Now, the difference on this problem is I have an x to the fourth, and in the middle, when I use my numbers that I've thought about, I need to put x squared with my numbers. So plus 3x squared minus 9x squared, and then go ahead and bring down that last number, minus 27, equals 0. And then we'll do this cut line. We can factor out an x squared. So x squared, leaving me with a factor of x squared, because I subtract my exponents, plus, and these will cancel, x squareds, and I'll have x squared plus 3. My next 2 will divide by negative 9. So I'll bring the negative 9 down, and I'll have x squared plus 3, getting my matching parentheses. So now I'm ready to write my matching parentheses, x squared plus 3, and then my other parentheses, x squared minus 9, and equals 0. Remember that we're not finished at this point. We have to set each parentheses equal to 0. So I'll start with x squared plus 3 equals 0. Now, I want you to notice that you'll probably have a problem where you have an x squared equal to a negative number, as I do here. So when you have an x squared, you undo the squaring by doing a square root on each side. And so that'll give me x equals, now I'll have 2 answers, so I need plus or minus. Because I have a negative inside the square root, I'll have an I and then the square root around the 3. And so that'll separate into 2 answers, a positive I square root 3 and a negative I square root 3. For my other parentheses, which was x squared minus 9, so you'll probably have a second parentheses that you will add a number to both sides. And so you'll have x squared equals a positive number. Now, you do still do the square root to both sides, and you will still get a plus or minus answer, but it's not negative, so you will not have an I. And the square root of 9 is actually a number, 3. So you'll get x equals 3 and x equals negative 3, or something like that for your problem. So when you type them in, you'll have the positive I square root 3, you'll have the negative I square root 3, you'll have the 3 and the negative 3, or whatever it is for your problem, separated by commas. Moving on, my next one is multiple choice, but you still must show complete work on the work page for this multiple choice problem. So this is like your number 8. And so for this number 8, my problem is x to the third minus 512 equals 0. So the 512 is a perfect cube. If I do the third root of 512, for that, I will get 8. So I have the formula for perfect cubes as a to the third minus b to the third equals, and then I have a parentheses a plus b, and then another parentheses a, excuse me, that's not the right, it's a minus b, and then a squared plus ab plus b squared. In my problem, the a would be the third root of the x to the third. So the a would be an x. B in my problem, B in my problem would be the third root of the 512, and we already talked about it, that b is 8. So the third root of that 512, which is an 8. 8 times 8 times 8 gives me 512. So I can substitute into my formula. So it says a minus b, that's going to be x minus 8. And then another parentheses says to take the x and square it, plus then take the a times the b. We would probably write that as 8x, and then plus the b squared. So 8 times 8, 64, equals 0. Now, for the first one, I'll do x minus 8 equals 0. I can add 8 to both sides of my equal sign, and one of my solutions is going to be x equals 8. But this problem has more that has to be done, because now we need to solve this equation, x squared plus 8x plus 64 equals 0. Now, it will not factor, and so we're going to need to do the quadratic formula for this. So a is 1, b is 8, and c is 64. And I'm going to do the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So I'll have x equals negative 8 plus or minus, inside the square root, I'll have 8 squared minus 4 times my 1 times my 64. And this is over 2 times 1. So I can use my Desmos calculator to get the inside of the square root. So if you type in 8 squared minus 4 times 1 times 64, not including the square root, you will get negative 192. And then your denominator is a 2. Now, the negative on the 192 will become an I. So you'll take out an I, and then 192 is going to break down. We can do some factoring, and I'll find a place where I can do that work up here in a corner. So actually, I'm going to erase just a little bit so that I have some space to work. So I'm going to take that 192 and break it down into 2, and that will give me 96. And then I can break that down into 2 and 48. And then that would be 2 and 24, 2 and 12, 2 and 6, 2 and 3. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've got 6 2s. And a 3. And then my denominator is a 2. So I can circle out pairs. I have 3 pairs. And so this is going to simplify. I'm going to erase again so that I have room. So I'll have x equals negative 8 plus or minus. When I take these 2's out, 2 times 2 times 2 will give me 8, and then an I, and then I'll still have inside the square root a 3. And then my denominator is a 2, and I can cancel this 2 with this 8, making negative 4, and with this 8i, making 4i. So this part of my final answer is going to be x equals negative 4 plus 4i square root of 3. And as I look at my answers that would have the 8, I would need to choose an answer that has the 8, and then the negative 4 plus 4. Now they put the I after the square root, and then the negative 4 minus the 4, square root 3i. And so my choice would be answer choice B. There is a great deal of work that you need to show on this, so make sure that you show the steps, not only for the formula, but also for solving the quadratic. That will be the largest problem you'll have to do. Okay, we have 2 to go. Number 9, this is to review solving your radical equations. So number 9 is the square root. For me, the square root of 4y plus 4, and then minus 4 equaling 6. So remember, we want to get the square root by itself. You'll need to do whatever is necessary to get rid of any numbers. So I'm going to need to add 4. That's going to give me the square root of 4y plus 4 equaling 10. Then to remove the square root, I raise each side to the second power, or in other words, square both sides. So squaring gets rid of the square root, so I'll have 4y plus 4 equals, and then on the other side, 10 to the second power is 10 times 10, which is 100. Now I'm ready to solve my equation. So 4y plus 4 equaling 100, I can subtract 4 from both sides, which will give me 4y equaling 96. And then I can divide both sides by 4. And y will equal 24. So 24 would be my final answer for that problem. You should check it and make sure that it works. You could do that with a calculator. 24 does check. And we have one last problem. Number 10, you'll have a problem with a cube root for number 10. So mine is the third root of 3y plus 4 minus 6 equals 4. So again, we want to get the radical by itself. I'll need to add 6 to both sides to make that happen. So this will cancel. I'll have the third root of 3y plus 4 equaling 10. Then I'll need to get rid of my third root. I can do that by raising each side to a third power, not a square power, but a third power. So that will cancel the third root, leaving me with 3y plus 4 equaling, and then 10 times 10 times 10 is actually 1,000. So this is very similar to your last one. 3y plus 4 equals 1,000. I'll need to minus 4 to both sides of my equal sign. Just a little bit bigger number. So 3y equals 996. Dividing both sides by 3, I'll have y equals 332. And 332, if you put it back in the radical sign, will check, and that's your one solution. So you've got an example like each one of the equations you have to solve. Be sure to ask for help as you need it. Good luck as you do your homework.